Welcome to the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Rosensweet, mom of 3 young people, peaceful parenting coach, and your cheerleader and guide on all things parenting. Each week, we'll cover the tools, strategies, and support you need to end the yelling and power struggles and encourage your kids to listen and cooperate so that you can enjoy your family time. I'm happy to say we have a great relationship with our 3 kids. The teen years have been easy and joyful, not because we're special unicorns, but because my kids were raised with peaceful parenting. I've also helped so many parents just like you stop struggling and enjoy their kids again. I'm excited to be here with you today and bring you the insight and information you need to make your parenting journey a little more peaceful. Let's dive into this week's conversation. Hey all, welcome back to another episode of the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. Today's episode is with 2 guest experts, and we are talking about disordered eating and body image today. And just a heads up, we are talking about eating disorders a little bit. If you or someone you love, someone in your family is struggling with disordered eating or an eating disorder, you can check out nedic.ca. That is NEDIC.ca, and it's the National Eating Disorder Information Center. That is the resource that our guests today have recommended. We are talking about how to raise kids who don't experience disordered eating or eating disorders, what to do if you suspect that your child is doing some disordered eating. We also got into healthy body image, body neutrality, food neutrality, and social media, and our own work. So many of these things are so connected, but I've been getting a lot of questions lately about what to do if your child is saying negative things about their body, or that they have to exercise more, or saying, I can't eat that. And I realized this is a subject that I don't know that much about. And so I really wanted to reach out to some experts. Today I have with me Luciana Rosu-Sieza. I hope I'm saying her name right. Also known as Lucy, who is the director of BANA. BANA is the Bulimia Anorexia Nervosa Association in Windsor, Ontario. And also I have with me Alexis Sauls Ramos, who is the eating disorder prevention specialist for BANA, and she's also a social worker. I think that you are going to learn a lot in this conversation. It was a conversation that every parent needs to hear, because we are just so bombarded with the diet culture and quote wellness culture today. And I know this is something that has come up with almost every parent that I have spoken with. Again, if you have concerns about yourself or someone that you love, we will put a link to this in the show notes, but be sure to check out nedic.ca, which is the National Eating Disorder Information Center. Okay, I also want to encourage you to share this episode with any parents you know who might need to hear it. And don't forget to leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. It's super easy to do. You can just do it right from your phone, and every 5-star rating and review helps us to reach more families and more parents. And that's the way that we often find new podcasts, is searching on our phone. And of course, the way that new podcasts often get found is if they've got a lot of ratings and reviews. So it would really help us out a lot if you could do that. And also word of mouth does help. So any of those things, we would really appreciate it. Let's meet Lucy and Alexis. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. Today I have with me Lucy and Alexis, who are going to introduce themselves shortly, and they are from BANA, which is the Bulimia Anorexia Nervosa Association. Welcome, Lucy and Alexis.
Thank you.
If we want to start with you, Lucy, if you just want to tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, and then we'll ask you, Alexis.
All right, certainly. So my name is Luciana Rosu-Sieza. Everybody calls me Lucy from BANA. I've been with the organization for 21 years. I've been in this role for 13 years, and 8 years I spent in health promotion. And I went into schools and talked about self-esteem, resilience, coping, body image, and social media literacy. So that's kind of who I am.
Great. And thanks, Alexis.
Hi, yeah. So my name's Alexis Sauls Ramos. I'm a registered social worker. Clinically, I've done a few different things, but most of my work has been in working with adolescents and young adults with clinical diagnosed eating disorders in an outpatient setting. Now what I do is work in eating disorder prevention. So I work as part of a province-wide prevention strategy, just looking to create safer spaces in our communities and get ahead of the sort of clinical eating disorders that we're familiar with.
Perfect. And that's just really what we're trying to do in this podcast. I realize that I get a lot of questions from parents in my community or coaching clients who are like, what do I do when my 11-year-old says that he wants to have a six pack, or my 9-year-old suddenly says that she's fat, and things. And I realized that I'm a little bit ill-equipped. So I wanted to get some experts in to sort of talk about what parents can do to avoid or help their children not develop disordered eating. So maybe we'll just start with that. If you could explain, one of you, and you decide who's going to take which question, but if you could explain what is disordered eating, and then maybe we could move into what causes it. And I realize this probably are huge questions, but just let's get the basics.
I can take that end of things. So disordered eating is really broad, but really it's just any sort of relationship to food and eating that is distressed, that is sort of outside of our normative, like feeding our bodies in relation to our hunger and fullness cues. So it takes a lot of forms. It's, cutting out food groups, limiting the amount of food or type of food that we eat in a day, certainly taking any substances, diet pills, anything of that nature, laxatives that are going to impact how food is digested or absorbed by our bodies or processed by our bodies. And disordered eating is also going to expand into other relations, right? Other behaviors, rather. So think about obsessive or rigid exercise and other behaviors where we're trying to control, manipulate, or change the size and shape of our bodies.
It can also be, sorry to interrupt, it can also be like a really high focus on healthy eating, right? Quote,
right.
Healthy eating, and I think that's called orthorexia. Is that the right word?
Yeah. Yeah. So orthorexia, it's not one of the formal diagnostic criteria, but informally, it is something that we're seeing as extremely common. And the thing we see right now is that wellness culture has become the new sort of version of diet culture. And so by being health focused, people think it's benign. It's not at all benign, right? Because that hyper focus on being, only eating so-called healthy foods is really restrictive, right?
Right.
And can create physical issues, but it's also psychologically really risky as well.
I see that too in parenting. We don't realize when we worry so much about giving our kids a nutritious meals, how much we're influenced by that, diet culture and wellness culture of not wanting to, feeling bad about letting our kids have ice cream and stuff like that. So yeah, thanks for saying that. What does cause disordered eating?
I think for myself, when I think of disordered eating, I think so much of the diet culture, the wellness culture, sort of, we look at the diets that have been around, obviously, for many, many years. And generally speaking, 95 to 98% of diets fail. And so when we look at that, it's just sort of putting us on this wheel that we could never sort of succeed. And so we're continuously chasing the next diet, but really diets are formulated to fail. And so essentially we blame ourselves for the failed diet. We don't blame the diet for the failure. So essentially our self-esteem lowers. We tried to chase the next best diet. And as Alexis was sort of saying, that wellness culture is that new diet. So we're getting a lot of positive accolades. And I think that it's sort of sold to us in a different way. So it's sold to us in more of a positive way. So I think just in the last probably 5 to 10 years, we've seen a shift in that where we see, fitspiration, things around if you're really fit, if you're eating really healthy, if you're eating really clean, it's almost applauded. But what it really does cause is disordered eating. And then that's transferred into our children. And so we talk about, food neutrality and sort of looking at balance with food and having a healthy relationship with food essentially, right? Because we know food is social, food is happy, and a lot of family and good memories are surrounded by food. So we want to sort of create that in our space rather than strict food, relationship that it has strict food rules sort of associated with, or we eliminate sort of certain food groups in our home, or we make comments around eating too much of this or too much of that. That seems to be surrounded in sort of homes. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. I think that that's really important. A lot of self-proclaimed experts, I say, in the nutrition field that they don't have the credentials to back up what they're saying. So I think of like social media, TikTokers, where they post several, TikToks a day, sort of talking about what I eat in a day, or if you want to look like this, you eat this. But we really don't have the background information. It's really like the highlight reel that we're getting.
Mm-hmm. I think I remember over the years reading or hearing that what you're just talking about, like that wellness culture and diet culture is one cause of disordered eating, but that there's also like an emotional cause of disordered eating. Can you talk, or a mental and emotional cause? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can jump into that piece. So we look at the risk factors or causes. Like I tend to frame it as risk factors more than causes, because the reality is when we're talking about disordered eating, and remember, disordered eating is a precursor to eating disorders, right? So we're talking about risks and causes for disordered eating. We're talking about risks and causes for eating disorders. And the reality is it's always going to be a little bit of a perfect storm. What makes one person at risk or one person more resilient, it's individual. But yeah, if we move beyond exposure to diet culture, wellness culture, peer pressure, all of that, psychologically, there's a few things. So we're going to see, any like pre-existing mental health concern, depression, anxiety is going to sort of, increase your vulnerability. Low self-esteem, absolutely, whether it's related to like physical appearance or not, can translate to that. Certain personality traits are also going to increase risk. So a perfectionistic personality is going to increase risk for disordered eating and then eating disorders. Specifically, perfectionism has had a relationship to anorexia nervosa specifically. Other personalities are going to relate to other forms of disordered eating. And this, stepping back from the individual, there's biological factors that are going to create vulnerability. Genetics, right? So having a parent or family member with a history of an eating disorder is going to increase your risk of, again, disordered eating and then eating disorders as well. And, again, it's all these things coming together, right? Trauma increases risk. We see really high rates of trauma amongst our individuals with diagnosed eating disorders. So again, our folks with disordered eating, right? I suspect we would also see slightly higher rates of trauma or adverse childhood experiences and things like that as well. So again, perfect storm, right? And somebody could have all those factors and not get disordered eating, and we just look at resiliency factors as well.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Can you talk? So I think there's this myth out there that we only need to worry about girls and disordered eating. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Alexis. I was just going to say, I think really essentially when we think about boys, they're not included as much because I think there's a hyper focus on body image with females. However, if we look at role models for boys, a lot of times we think of a superhero, right? And that's sort of that muscular alpha male has been presented even differently over generations, right? And we see that that's there. We hear about boys, as you were sort of saying, like boys wanting a six pack, or sort of that representation that we see in the media as well, whether it's in movies or, any type of, I was going to say magazines. I don't know how much people look at magazines anymore. I'm dating myself. But just essentially any media, right? We see a lot of these type of boys. And so boys are talking more about wanting to achieve that ideal body and talking about that over-exercising at a younger and younger age, which then starts to include things like taking substances or perhaps juicing. They talk about, different things that they can take to sort of enhance that body. I think there is that pressure for boys continuously. And I think there is not a lot of support for them because I think they're supposed to sort of accept the fact that they should look like this. And the reality is that people don't naturally look like that. And so there is this, expectation to look like that and to sort of idealize this ideal body type that continuously changes over time. So I definitely think boys are very much included in the conversation and should be included in the conversation.
I noticed a few years ago on TV, like I was watching the show This Is Us. Do you know that show?
Yes.
And even like all the dads on the show, even though like, of course, there's the one that's the Hollywood actor, but all the other dads who are just supposed to be like average guys, they are all like, they have like gym, like, 5 hours at a day at the gym bodies, just supposed to be like the average, American guy. And it really hit me. I was like, wow, this like pressure to have the perfect body is now extended to like men on TV, not just women, right?
Well, and that's I think, no one's immune from getting an eating disorder. And the reality is that, like, I think when people think about eating disorders, they think about anorexia and they think about thin white women, right? And that's just one population group who's vulnerable. Yes, we know that our young females are at increased risk for a bunch of developmental factors and societal factors. But to Lucy's point, our men and our boys are extremely at risk. But also really highly at risk are trans, non-binary, and gender diverse folks. They're actually at 5 times the risk of developing an eating disorder. I mean, for all of the reasons that we think come to mind right away, you're experiencing dysphoria, dysmorphia with your body and trying to tackle that in addition to being exposed, so we're all exposed to appearance ideals, right? Appearance ideals are what society tells us the perfect woman, the perfect man looks like. And those ideals are ever changing. They look different across cultures. They look different within cultures. We're all exposed to them. That's also going to make another really big cause for disordered eating. But then our trans, non-binary, gender diverse folks, right, are grappling with being these like very like cis-normative, heteronormative images of like what the perfect person looks like when struggling with this themselves in their own body, already feeling at odds with their own body in relation to their gender and identity.
Thanks for bringing that up. Talk about extra challenges.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, we talk about the perfect body. I think there's also that myth out there that you only have to worry about your child if they're really thin. But I've recently read that eating disorders show up in people of all different body types. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So there isn't one body of like what someone with an eating disorder looks like, period, right? A lot of people with an eating disorder are going to present in a body that's going to appear sort of in that sort of quote unquote normal range. We could unpack what normal bodies are for hours, but we'll just use that for now. And all people with eating disorders are going to exist in what are like larger or high weight bodies as well, regardless of the eating disorder, right? So first of all, there's a lot of different kinds of eating disorders: anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder are the 3 highlight ones. There's others beyond that. Those are going to impact the body differently, but all bodies are different, right? Somebody, I lost my train of thought there. You can't, I think that the most important takeaway is you cannot ever look at a human and know if they have an eating disorder. People get a lot of like, oh, you look healthy, you don't have an eating disorder, or, oh, you're in a high weight body, you can't possibly have anorexia. It's simply not true.
Yeah. I appreciate you dispelling that myth. Did you want to add anything to that, Lucy?
Yeah, I mean, I think our media has sort of fed us this idea that it's anorexia nervosa, it's underweight, it's the thinness that you're sort of searching for. But as we know, people are in all bodies, and also the diagnostic manual looks at binge eating disorder, which sometimes people are in a larger body, and then we look at bulimia nervosa, which it can have that appearance, like Alexis said. So I think it's really hard to sort of identify what that body looks like. And I think that's part of the learning for people, is that some of those things and signs that you're looking for may not be related to appearance or weight. It may be other things that you should be sort of searching out for.
Okay, that's a great segue into what sort of red flags or signs should parents keep an eye out for? Yeah, I guess I was going to say if they suspect their child has disordered eating, but I imagine there are lots of parents who didn't suspect at all that their child had disordered eating. So what should we be looking for?
There's the really, I think, highlight thing. So, right off the bat, if you do notice weight changes in your child, right, I think in either direction, right? Sudden, rapid, or significant weight loss, but also with rapid weight gain. And I don't say that to say like kids shouldn't be gaining weight. That's a tricky one, actually. I should be very careful. Kids do gain weight quite quickly. They're developing at all different paces. I just don't want to miss the conversation around binge eating disorder, which is going to impact weight a little bit different. I don't want to sort of suddenly say that the kids shouldn't be gaining weight.
No, I remember when my kids were little, they would like chunk out and then they'd grow up, right? And like, so I guess maybe you could say if they've stopped growing or something, and then you notice any rapid weight gain or.
So I think if we're noticing, sudden changes in weight, because one of the things to note with children is their bodies, for as like incredibly resilient as a child body is, they're also really vulnerable. And kids, for a bunch of reasons, can become extremely sick with low weight very quickly. you can see like a 6-week from like onset of disordered eating to like hospitalization. It's not the norm, but like they can lose weight really quickly. And there's this a point where the body just, and it runs away with itself. But that is not most cases. So if you do notice sudden changes, if you notice also just sudden like lethargy, headaches, if they're cold all the time, right? We're kind of getting at those medical early signs, like if there's fainting episodes. If we're seeing like significant weight loss, you're going to start to see those medical symptoms. Obviously, those could be symptoms of anything else. If your kid's fainting and having migraines and is cold all the time, take them to the doctor no matter what. Beyond that, right, when you're seeing a kid who has like a sudden change in how they're eating, right? Are they significantly less? Are they talking about eating less? Are they suddenly cutting out whole food groups? Like, oh, I don't eat dessert anymore. I don't eat bread anymore. I don't eat greens anymore. Changes from what their normative eating habits are, changes outside of like their preferred foods, excessive and obsessive exercising, rigidity around food, when I can eat, how much I can eat, and also like pulling away. Eating disorders are really secretive. I always say like eating disorders live in the shadows. They really encourage the individual to become very secretive. They hide a lot of behaviors. Again, that goes for anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder. There can be a lot of shame experience for folks who have eating disorders of all kinds. So if you're noticing them really withdrawing, being very secretive, wearing clothes that are outside of their norm, right? So wearing very baggy clothes if it's not their normal style dressing, wearing baggy clothes in the summer, hiding their body, concealing their body, becoming shy suddenly if it's not their normal sort of relationship to their body. And again, those could be signs of other things, but this is when we want to get our kind of antenna up and really be
a detective.
Yeah, exactly.
So what if there's a parent listening right now who does see some of those things, what should they do?
I think the first, and this is I think parenting in general. Like I have a 5-year-old, so like having different levels of conversation.
Yeah,
it had like an 11-year-old.
I do want to go back after we talk about this and talk about sort of preemptively what can we do as parents to help our child never get to this point. But if you already are, because I have had people ask me about this, like my kid is suddenly, not eating dinner like with the rest of us or whatever. And because I didn't know what to do, I would always say, talk to your family doctor. But is there something else that parents could or should do?
I think the first step is always just to have the more you can have open communication, obviously in general, the better. But I think just approaching your child and sort of saying, hey, I'm noticing this. Like, how are you feeling? What's going on? I think we want to be mindful of like being really judgment free, being a very open, I always say, come from a place of like open, sincere curiosity. Explore, what's going on? How are you feeling? How are things going? I noticed this, I'm curious, so you're not eating bread. I'm curious why that is, right? I always say, just start from the most like open place, because for as much as it could be a sign that your kid is stepping into disordered eating into an eating disorder space, there could be something else going on, right? Depression can cause changes in eating. Other health concerns can cause changes in eating. Neurodivergence can cause changes in eating, right? So like open, right? But I think coming from a non-judgmental place of, I'm concerned about you. Let's talk about what's going on. I think you can set boundaries around like if the child says like, I'm not eating this or I'm not eating with the family. You guys come back to like, eating at the family is really important to us. And it's important that we know that you're getting enough nourishment for your body. It's part of our job as your parents is to make sure that you're getting what your body needs. And part of that's eating dinner as a family and connecting and socializing and all these things. But just, the biggest thing, like, don't let it go. If something catches your attention, don't like the sit and wait. I just wouldn't do it. Kids can get sick so fast. Eating disorders are so dangerous. They're life-threatening illnesses. I wouldn't go for the wait and see approach. I would talk to your kid and then, take them to a family doctor, right? You're never going to go wrong by seeking medical, again, because of how dangerous it is, considering how vulnerable a child's body is. And I'm not talking about like little kids. I'm talking about, birth through end of adolescence into early adulthood. Our bodies are vulnerable. Go to the doctor, right? Know for an answer. Have them seen, have them assessed, and be very persistent if you have concerns, right? Sometimes doctors will write off like, oh, it's normative behavior. Oh, they're a runner. Of course, their heart rate is low. It's like, no. Look, a developing child shouldn't be bradycardic. Like, it's just not appropriate, right?
Right.
So,
Or you just made me think of like girls who lose their periods too, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Mhm.
Don't let that slide, right?
Mhm.
Like, even if like there could be something else causing it, but yeah, a girl who has normal menstruation or, whatever normal is at adolescence, their period shouldn't stop.
Yeah,
It just,
even if they're an athlete, I've read that's like a big thing too. It used to be seen as normal for an athletic girl to lose their period, and there definitely is something wrong if they are, as far as I've been reading lately.
yeah, I worry about my clinical practice. I work with a lot of youth, male and female, who are high-level competitive athletes across a variety of sports. And I think when they're competing at a really high level, there can really easily be a lot of excuses made for why they're experiencing something outside of the norm developmentally. And I would be very cautious. I would caution parents against writing things off as like, oh, they're an athlete, because our athletes are very at risk for developing eating disorders.
Right. There's a lot of pressure to have a certain body type to perform better, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, so backing up a bit, what are some things that we can do as parents? You mentioned you have a 5-year-old, Alexis. What are some things that we can do as parents to help our child have that healthy relationship with food and with their, maybe these are two separate questions, but food and body image and body acceptance?
I can talk about what I do is like with my little, and like Lucy has a couple of kids who are a little bit older, and like, personally, professionally, both have different things to offer to this.
Great. Well, let's start with little and then we'll move to big.
Yeah. Well, this increased developmentally, right? Body image. So a couple things we can do before we even have a conversation with our children is body neutrality, right? Coming from a place of body neutrality, not even body positivity, but just like bodies are bodies. The way they look, the size of the shape they take is not the most important thing. Looking at how our bodies serve us, celebrating how our bodies serve us. But we're around our children, not talking about our own bodies in negative ways and not talking about other people's bodies in negative ways. We may think that talking about the body of the neighbor is a like benign, fine thing to see, but like we're just modeling to our children how we relate to other people, how we feel about bodies. So first of all, how are you talking about your own body? How are you talking about other people's bodies is really important. And then how are you talking about your child's body, right? The simple thing is that like there's just almost never a good reason to talk about somebody's appearance and body. There just isn't. It's really ingrained in us socially, right? Like we're taught to comment on bodies like, oh, you see so-and-so, they've lost weight. Or you see so-and-so, they look fantastic. Or like, whatever it is. We just don't need to do it, right? So if we just start by not commenting on bodies and their size and shape and weight, and then with kids, right, really celebrating the body, right? How their body helps them, how they've served them. Oh my goodness, your legs are so strong. Did you run all the way across that room? Wow, that's so awesome, right? And celebrating the parts of their bodies that might feel vulnerable down the road, right? Like my son loves nothing more than to like show me his belly, and he wants to see my belly, and he wants to, he's just like a very like affectionate little human. And we were like, oh my gosh, look at your belly, look how beautiful it is. Like, oh my goodness, it looks so full. You must have had such a delicious meal. Look, such a happy belly, right? Just like creating language around our bodies that's celebratory, that's positive, that's celebrating how it serves us, I think is a great place to start off, and just staying away from anything critical. There's just not a need for it, especially not with developing brains and bodies. Yeah.
I love that. I saw this lovely Instagram reel of a little tiny girl, it was maybe 3, whose mother couldn't figure out why she kept stuffing like stuff in her waistband to give herself a bigger belly. And her mother was like, what are you doing? And she said, I want to look beautiful just like you, mommy. It really shows that we don't have, we're taught to have these negative associations with certain body shapes, right? Okay, so having a sort of just a blanket policy of we don't make comments about people's bodies, and then celebrating their bodies for celebrating all shapes and sizes of your child's body and what your child's body can do, right? I remember actually when my daughter was little, and she's always been like not one of those tiny little wisps of a girl. And she came home from school one day when she was in first grade, I think, and said, all the other girls in my class are so skinny. And she was like noticing the difference. And I said to her, like, can your body jump high? Can you run fast? And we just really focused on that. And I could tell that it really kind of changed her the way she was looking at the differences in bodies. So I'm glad I did the right thing. What about you, Lucy, in terms of like older kids? How can we help them have that, well, we were talking about positive body image, and maybe we can go back to talking about healthy relationship to food after.
Absolutely. So my kids are 10 and 14, almost 15. My daughter's going to be 15 on Sunday. And I have a boy and a girl. So that's interesting as well. Just having the two different genders and sort of raising them in the same way. So for myself, I always feel that role modeling is everything in our household. So part of what we do is many things around eating together. There's no electronics at the table, right? So those are some things, talking just about like having open conversation. I think communication is everything. I think once you sort of bridge that communication, I always had a rule with my kids as well that anywhere we went, I would say to them, if you see something that you're unsure of or you want to ask me, then when we get to the car, feel free to ask me anything. And they would say, oh, I have to ask you something. And I would sort of cue what they're going to ask me about. And so having that open dialogue, being non-judgmental around that. And I really echo the idea that, bodies are all beautiful, and really celebrating that people come in all shapes and sizes. Another thing that I do is I'll say, you have your grandma's, or like genetically, right? Looking at photos and saying like, we resemble these people in our lives, because genetic does have a predisposition to our bodies, whether it's if we're tall or short seems more acceptable, but our body shapes are also the same type of lineage of our genetic makeup, right? So sort of celebrating that as well. I, have a zero tolerance sort of for making fun of people or appearance-based comments. I don't think it's necessary. I think sometimes it's nice to celebrate, like, you have eyes like this person, or your hair color so beautiful because it's, it's lightened up in the summer, and how beautiful. Look at, you have these natural highlights, but really taking away from, our bodies as an appearance space, but really looking at, like you were kind of saying, around, your body's strong. You can run, you can jump. Like, how wonderful is that? Look at all the things that our bodies can do for us, and how many wonderful things that they do. And then I think sort of moving into the food, again, it's the same thing. I think commenting about food in certain ways. So we use a very food neutral sort of approach at home. And I'll say, how can we balance out your lunch, right? So, even at 10 years old, my son's been sort of being very present in making his lunch with me. And so what can we do to sort of balance it out? So not only are you teaching some sort of, Canada's food guide, we look at those kind of things. We also look at, what is missing here. I always tell my kids, like, eat the fresh fruits and vegetables first so that they're not spoiled by the time you want to eat them in the afternoon, right? So giving a little bit of direction, but giving them some freedom to choose the foods that they like. And I always say, like, if you have foods available to kids, they will eat them. And sometimes it's washing the fruit, it's cutting the fruit, it's, putting all of those things out, but all foods fit, so that we don't say, like, we don't ever talk about foods as being bad or good. There's no moral sort of indication that if you eat this, you're bad. We hear that in the diet culture, right? Tomorrow I'm going to start being good. Today I was really bad. It's almost like we need a punishment for indulging in something, or using food as reward is another thing, right? We don't use food as reward. It just creates that moral sort of complication to food being, I'm being good today, right? And so using food in a very social environment, cooking together, I think that's important as well, getting your kids in the kitchen and sort of being part of the process. And then role modeling, right? So mom eats all kinds of things, and mom enjoys eating different things. And if we don't like something, that's okay too. So having that acceptance, like, both my kids are not exactly the same, but trying to say, this is our dinner and this is what we have, and we're all going to enjoy it. And if you don't like something, then you can eat something else, right? Just those kinds of things. But I think the ears are always listening. I always say that, the little ears. So from a very young age, just be very cautious about what we're saying around food, weight, bodies, appearance, and what value we're sort of placing on those things. I encourage parents all the time for that language, right? To find the language around food, around bodies, so that they can better sort of parent their children, so that we're not encouraging those things. And if they do come with those conversations, then let's deconstruct them a little bit, right? And so I'll say to my kids, what did you see on social media? Let's talk about it, right? And so let's have those open conversations. And it's really worked well for my children. They're very open, and we talk about a lot of different things. And I feel like we're sort of all learning from each other, because they're they're brilliant when it comes to, sort of social media and understanding things that I probably don't. And also parents get on social media and understand social media so that you know what sort of you're up against, right? So that you're not sort of ignoring it, hoping it's going to disappear, because it won't.
Yeah. I mean, I love that you brought up social media because, we talked about that in the beginning of our time together. We talked about that being an influence on kids and disordered eating. Do you have any specific recommendations? I mean, you just said get on social media and talk to your kids about it, but I don't know. Do you have anything else that you want parents to know from what you've seen? What the influence that social media has had on kids and disordered eating?
Yeah, many different things. I think one of them is ensuring that you have an open dialogue. Limit social media. I think that kids are getting on social media very young and they're exposed to many, many different messaging that they can't really process. So I always encourage my kids as well. Like, if you see something that you're unsure of, let's talk about it. Like, show me. Let's sort of dissect it together. Unfollow things. I think we're bound to follow things sometimes, and then we need to back up and say, and I'm sort of referring to, like, my daughter's going to be 15, right? So that sort of age demographic with youth, with adolescents especially, if something is, because algorithms are interesting, right? So whatever you're looking up, if you look at it once, it will continue to feed those things. I know there's been a lot of studies in terms of Instagram and looking at like how photos, right? And then I also challenge people, don't always comment. We tend to comment on people's photos or achievements in an appearance way. So somebody graduates from university or high school, we're like, oh, your daughter's so pretty, beautiful photo, beautiful young girl, instead of intelligent, smart, way to go, right? Like you did it, right? So it's not sort of based on the achievement. So kind of challenging people to go away from that appearance-based comments, and then not looking for those comments and likes as validation. So I talk to young people often and they'll say, I spend a lot of times using editing and filtering tools on my phone. So smartphones have everything available to in your hand. And so they'll alter these photos, they'll post them, and they'll expect a certain amount of likes or comments. And if they don't get them, they take it down. So it's a really sense of validation and self-esteem. And so I always talk about, like, where do we get our self-esteem from, right? And we do an activity where we do a self-esteem wheel, and we look at like different places that we can get our self-esteem from. And a lot of it is based on relationship, things we're good at, school, peers, family, fun activities, hobbies, rather than I get half of my validation from appearance, right? So if I look good, then I feel good. If I don't feel good, then I have my self-esteem sort of plummets. And so really encouraging that confidence comes from different areas and talk about those things. Those are really important things. And then, limit the time. We see that kids are spending a lot of time on social media. I think adolescents spend at least 5 hours, some of them, on social media, which is a tremendous amount. So I don't think people realize how much time is actually spent on social media, which can create a really negative perception of self because of the comparison trap we're all in.
Yeah.
And I say, like, kids have the comparison trap, parents have the comparison trap. We're never feeling good enough because that highlight reel is unrealistic to compare ourselves to.
I love how you mentioned filters, because I think that would be a useful exercise too with kids, is to look at, like, I know there are websites that show like the photos before they were touched up and the photos after, and just like looking at how things are. I know it's not Photoshopped these days, but we still call it how things are Photoshopped, because I bet a lot of kids don't even know that's not really what that woman's body looks like in real life. Like what you're seeing on Instagram, like it's not actually what she looks like. So that might be a helpful thing to do too with kids.
Yeah, we had a campaign, actually. I'll just say it quickly, Alexis, but we had a Be Your Selfie campaign, and we challenged people to take a photo with a Polaroid camera.
Oh, nice.
That you can't alter the photo at all. And they were very skeptical. Young people felt like, and once they saw that photo, it was amazing to see their reaction that they actually really liked it. And they wanted to keep it. Like, they really felt like, oh, I don't look so bad, or this photo looks better than I thought. And so getting them away from the filters a little bit, right? And so demonstrating that you look great just the way you are.
Mm-hmm. Alexis, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I think talking about it. I think it's funny if you talk to a teenager and you're like, well, people are putting filters on, the roll their eyes, like I know. But I think until they're forced to really sit with like the comparison of like filtered and unfiltered images, it's like, it's like things we know a lot of things. We don't really want to sit with the discomfort of the reality of it. But like TikTok is incredible. So people say, oh, well, there's a tag to show if you have like a filter over your video. That's not actually true. You can have like sort of different beauty filters on your videos, or there's no indication of it. And so most videos on TikTok, or many, I shouldn't most, a lot of videos on TikTok, especially that the influencers, they are actually filtered or smoothed out in a really significant way when you see the comparison. And there is no tag. There is no indication that a filter is being used, because a lot of them are also doing post-editing. They're not just editing on the app. And so they're getting around a lot of that. And so you see people doing their skincare routines and look how beautiful and clear and bouncy my skin is. And then you see the unfiltered images. And then, yeah, skin is skin, first of all. Who cares what it looks like? But it's not even close to the reality. And I think the thing for our kids to understand is that, step back and think about, is this person trying to sell you something? Is this person, or is someone going to profit off of your perception of this video, right? Even if it seems altruistic, even if it seems like you'll feel so good about yourself, and just like, is someone trying to sell you something? And I mean, I could go on a rant about this with like fitness and wellness plans and all of that. Like, I'm going to just throw out like we go back to like dieting and food relationships, like Weight Watchers, but even for me, worse is new. And these diet programs and fitness programs that claim like, we're about your self-esteem, we're about you just feeling good and, being your best self. Hey, they're just about as toxic, frankly, as any of like the sort of like worst offenders in times of diet planning. They are trying to sell you something, right? They're trying to imply like, we want you to do this to feel good, to feel energetic, to feel present in your life. The implication is you're not good enough the way you are right now. There's something wrong with you, right? And the only way to feel better is to change. I think it's a conversation to have in an ongoing way with kids, right? Is someone going to make money off of making you feel a certain way? But then going to Lucy's point, I think being on social media as parents, knowing what these kids are up against and taking part in it with them, right? Like, I'm not saying post your kids online and, I'm just saying like, don't say, oh, I don't get it, it's confusing. Like, be present on social media, not post, but just scroll TikTok, I don't know. Because then you will be tuned in, right? Especially when you hit your middle school age kids and then your high school age kids and older, because our, post-secondary age kids are not, immune to this.
Yeah.
Right? Like leading up to college or university, or even just, moving out and being independent. There's some major developmental tasks happening there. And those kids are really vulnerable as well for different reasons. You don't stop parenting at 18.
Yeah. And I think also we have to be careful, like if we want our kids to talk to us about things they see on social media, we have to be careful about not being too negative about their interests and the things that they're following or that they like, because they'll want to hide it if they think that we think it's stupid or they're embarrassed or whatever. So just really remembering that probably the things you liked when you were 14 would seem equally silly to you now than what your kids are watching at 14. And I also just when you were talking to about that how we see ourselves, I just wanted to highlight something that I think we talked about a little bit, but not as much as maybe as we should think about, is how we think about ourselves too. I think that, and how I think what both of you did mention, like talking about your own body or what you eat. But I think if you are worried about your kid in their body image and disordered eating, like, do your own work first, right? Because you said you see that a lot, that it kind of can run in families too.
Yeah, kids will notice, right? And I'm not saying that like you're not entitled as an adult to have your own struggles with your body, which of course we all, like that's normal. We all are, right? And it's going to ebb and flow, because I think as adults, the thing to remember is that we talk about children's and adolescent body changes. Our bodies change through our whole life, right? Our bodies are not stagnant. We don't stop growing and then our bodies stop changing, like not at all. So our body image is going to change throughout our lives. Our kids will notice. They'll notice how we talk about our bodies and ourselves. They'll notice how we eat or don't eat. So it's like, as an adult, as an autonomous person, right, you are entitled to make choices about what you eat, right? I mean, like, I think we do take a non-dieting approach in our work, But at the end of the day, a consenting adult is entitled to do what they want to. You have autonomy over your body. And I'd be very cautious of what you model and talk about in front of children, because I think, period, children shouldn't be dieting, right? A developing body shouldn't be dieting. A developing body should not be trying to lose weight. But then, yeah, like, how do you relate to your body? What clothes do you put on? It's summertime, right? Your kids are going to notice if you won't put on a bathing suit and get in the pool with them, or you won't go to the beach with them, or if you spend the whole day hiding. And I'm not saying that that's an easy thing to challenge. It's a big task, especially in the culture that we live in, that being willing to like put on the shorts, put on the bathing suit, get out into the water and be with your kids, that's what they're going to notice, right? And that's going to show them that, and it might be really uncomfortable, right? But they're going to remember that positive memory and that interaction. And they're going to, hear what you say. If you say, oh, I can't put a bathing suit on, or I can't come in the water, or I don't like how this is fitting my body right now. Now, maybe how you feel, but what we communicate is really important.
I love that. I'll even add to that, I think for myself, I think it's also really important to normalize that we don't have to feel good about ourselves every day. And I think we're sort of, that's another culture sort of learned behavior, that we should feel great every day and we're on every day, right? So I communicate that with my kids sometimes as well, right? We don't feel good every day about ourselves, and that's okay. If you have a bad hair day, if you're not feeling too comfortable in something, or, and I always say body image is something that is in progress. I've worked here for 21 years. And I think our bodies are continuously changing, and we have to think about that as well. But not feeling like we have to be on every day. I think that's a lot of pressure for kids as well, if that's how you're presenting yourself, right? And so sometimes it's important to be honest about that, but having that right conversation and using sort of those right words. And I think, as Alexis was mentioning, I really like the idea that kids want to build memories with their family and loved ones and people around them. So if it's going into the pool and having fun and releasing some of those uncomfortable feelings, it's going to make such a positive impact, not only on yourself, but also on your children, right? I hear often so many adults sort of saying, I hate pictures. I hate being in pictures. I've been hearing this recently, like, I hate pictures of myself. But that's sometimes all we have when things end, right? Like, we look back at those pictures, or we look back at memories, and we don't want to be missing from all those memories as well, right? Where were we on that vacation? We're not in one photograph, right? So we want to let go of that idea that we always have to look like we're on, we always have to feel good, but creating sort of a safe space to feel like it feels good just to be myself, right? My 10-year-old son always says, I love it, Mom, when you don't have makeup and you're in bed. Like, he just loves to cuddle with me, and he goes, I just think you look so cute. And it's just adorable, right? Like,
I love that.
You're just so cute, and I love your nose, or like little things that he points out about, and those are the things that stick with me, right? Those are the memories that you're building, and the relationship, sort of strengthening the relationship with your children.
I love that. What a cutie your son is.
Yeah, he's adorable. He's something else.
So I will put this to you, a couple of questions that were sort of the ones that I've gotten that made me feel I need to do a podcast about this. So this comes up all the time. What do you do? And tell me if you don't think you can answer this, but I hope you can. If your child, whether they are in a bigger body or not in a bigger body, says, I'm fat. I mean, first of all, I know we're really trying to not use fat as an insult, so maybe we would address that first. But how do you handle those kinds of comments from kids from a body neutral stance when you want to have a kid who has healthy eating?
Yeah. It's like, I think first thing to acknowledge and validate is it's going to be a delicate conversation. And I think, look, I talk about this stuff for a living. And if my kid just mentions like, oh, am I fat? I'm still going to be like, all right, take a big step. Yeah, exactly. I don't want to, drop the ball here. But it's going to depend on the kid and the nature of the conversation, how they're bringing it up. I will say right off the bat, you said, the word fat, right? It feels really loaded. Fat's not a bad word, right? And actually, the fat liberation movement, there's a lot of work being done to reclaim it as a very neutral descriptor. Now, not every person in a larger body is going to feel comfortable with that. That's a personal choice, right? But depending on what, where the kid is developmentally, for like my son, he's 5, I'm like, so what does that mean? Like, let's talk about what, so you're saying your body is fat. Like, I'm curious what that means to you. And they're like, oh, I feel fat. It's like, okay, well, fat's something that's on our body. So that's something that's in the food we eat. Our bodies require fat to function. We cannot live a fat-free existence. Not a thing. So what are we feeling, right? I'd be really curious. It's like, are you feeling insecure? Does somebody get comment about your body? Are you feeling uncomfortable? Are we comparing our bodies to someone around us? Like, I feel fat. What does it actually mean? And just, again, open, honest curiosity. I think we want to jump to like, oh, no. Like, when I say what don't do, oh, you're not fat, you're beautiful. Because it's a really loaded, you want to like, no, you're fine. But what we do right away is we villainize fat and we villainize bodies of all shapes and sizes. So especially you want to like, oh, no, it's fine. And like, right, take a step back, take a breath. Let's have a conversation about it, right? And explore, right? Where are they getting the information? Now, I think depending on the age of your child, maybe you have a kid who isn't a bigger body, right? Maybe you have a kid, maybe a parent, genetically in your family, you're just all going to be in larger bodies, and that is how your bodies are going to be happiest and healthiest. And we live in a incredibly fat-phobic, weight-biased culture where people at higher bodies face legitimate discrimination who are impacted in their mental health and physical. Weight bias is a public health issue. And so we are talking about an older child, especially your teenagers and young adults. It's okay to validate that, like, I hear that it's actually hard to live in a bigger body and the world is not always kind. And I'm really sorry that that's the experience that you're having, right? Because people don't understand that your weight is not equal to your health or your value or your worth. But it's okay to validate that it's hard, right? I think to not validate it is actually doing a disservice to that child or that adolescent. And then work with them, right? Okay, so we live in a really unfair world and people aren't always kind. Work on how we can support you at home and have home be a safe space. And what do you need, to have that space to yourself, right? Creating a home that is free of weight bias and diet culture is one of the best things you can do, right? Having a space for your child that they're safe to be themselves in their body. We're not getting rid of diet culture, unfortunately, as hard as a lot of us are trying. But we can create like protective little pockets. So, and let them know they can keep talking to you as they struggle with it, right? But how do we live in this world that's not always kind and not punish our bodies, right? Your body's not doing anything wrong by being the size it is. But if you are restricting, if you're starving yourself, if you're harming your body through too much exercise, right? You're now punishing your body for just trying to exist in the way it wants to be, right? And you doesn't deserve that because you don't deserve that. So it's a long conversation, a multi-part conversation, depending on where your kid's at.
Well, it's a good start.
It's a starting point.
What if, because one person asked me this, whose child actually was not in a bigger body. I think a 9-year-old girl and then she was worried that this was the early red flag of disordered eating when her child was in a like pretty average sized body, but was saying, I'm fat. How would you address that? And by the way, your example of how to talk to a child in a bigger body moved me almost to tears. It was really lovely and empathetic.
Anyway, I have lots of experience talking with these kiddos and, stepping back and just seeing them and it's adults too, right? Every adult in their lives deserves that same degree of empathy and love and support. And also, again, validation. We don't have to pretend the world's not a cruel place. It is, right? Well, for our kids who are in bodies who maybe are not experiencing are being stigmatized themselves for their bodies. So they themselves are going to maybe experience discrimination for their bodies, like our kiddos in higher weight. They're still impacted by weight bias, right? Because again, even a kid in a small body, right, can feel very like, well, shoot, my body is like, okay, I'm thin or I'm small, and it's been very clear to me that the world values me for my small body. Like, God, I don't want that to ever change. Right. And that can actually create risk for some of our smaller bodied kiddos too, because as they develop and they grow and their bodies change as they're meant to do, but the world's told them like, no, you're valuable because your body is small. Like, don't change it. But again, with that kid who's sort of a typical kind of what we call straight sized in the fashion world, I would again come back to that place of like, so I'm curious what's making you feel that way. Right. Exploring, what have they been told? What have they seen online? What are their friends talking about? And when they say fat, like, again, that like, I feel fat, right? That's not a feeling, but there's a lot of feelings caught up in that sentence. So it's just like, I would take a step back from that, because then you can start to work on dispelling myths. But, that kid, that 9-year-old may have a peer at school who they see as being quite similar in body. And that friend saying like, oh, I'm fat. Or my grandparent told me I'm fat, right? That happens all the time, no matter the size of the child, that adults are very critical of children's bodies. I always think back to my own early childhood experience. And I'm someone who grew up in a fairly small body genetically. And I realized probably until the age of like 16, the only people who commented on my body were adults. My peers did not comment on my body. Adults did. And my framework for the value of my body was based on the comments of adults who felt very comfortable talking about my body. I was like, that's an issue.
Yeah.
I don't think that's unusual either. I think adults are the ones commenting on kids' bodies. And then they paired that. So, maybe they talked to their child, and it turns out that their friend was talking about it, or they're seeing people on social media, right? So I would just always be willing to like, let's take a step back, right? I feel fat's a big statement. Let's like tip of the iceberg, right?
Right. Love that. Was there anything that I didn't ask you, either of you, about parenting specifically, and disordered eating and body image that you want parents to know?
I think a little bit of what I was thinking, Sarah, is just around, sort of as Alexis mentioned, how many adults comment on your children's bodies and how do you handle that as an adult? And perhaps that's a good conversation as well, because I hear a lot of that. Like, I'm thinking my daughter has always been in a smaller body, and sometimes people would comment about that in so many different avenues, like she should be a gymnast, or I hope she always stays like this. I mean, we hear these type of comments continuously. So around food, even people that come into your house that are very diet centric, right? And then they're like, oh, you're going to eat that? Well, don't eat too much of that or you're going to get fat. These type of comments continuously sort of coming at us. And so we can create this neutral environment in our own household. But when we step out, whether it's in public, whether it's in school, whether it's in people coming into our home, how do we navigate some of those comments, right? And so that's challenging sometimes for parents, and it's also challenging for children because they don't know what to say sometimes and they don't have the right words. And so how do we advocate for our children in front of our children? And when is that appropriate, when it's not? And how do we sort of debrief when we go home, I call it? Because I know my kids and I have had to debrief because they'll say, oh, this person's not eating cake. They don't eat this. They'll say they have to exercise in order to eat a piece of cake. What is that all about? Right? Because we don't do that. And so how do you have those conversations? And I think it's about really understanding and communicating to your kids that people do different things. The diet culture is very powerful. We're always, people are always comparing themselves. There's always something to be sold, which is a lot of this ideal sort of thinking. And how do we kind of get away from that without feeling like we're almost influenced in a way from those comments, or we're feeling hurt by some of the words that people use, right? If people say like, you should be doing A and B, and if your kid doesn't do that, and I hear that with people that have children in larger bodies, right? Like, what does the doctor say about their body, right? And so coming from that place of empathy, right? And sort of sometimes it's pulling somebody aside, like an adult to an adult, and having that conversation that we don't really like that in our household, right? Like, we don't want to hear those words. And sometimes that advocacy piece is really powerful because your kids are really getting the message that you're creating a space that you're making them feel good about themselves. And it's not just in our home, but it's outside of it as well. I call it body-based harassment. And I think it's really important, even at school, if that happens, to speak to the teacher, because sometimes that's encouraged. I used to go into schools and there would be like the Biggest Loser competition in the classroom.
Oh, no.
And it's just discouraging. Or Miss Smith won the Biggest Loser. And they're like, Miss Smith, you didn't eat any chocolate this week. And I'm like, oh my God, I have my work cut out for me. I think I need to come back, And so you look at those adult influencers, we call them, and they certainly have an impact, whether they're coaches, teachers, and family members extended. And we need to think about how do we create that sort of same messaging to them in a place where you feel like that your kids feels validated and respected.
Yeah, that's lovely, Lucy. Did you want to add anything, Alexis?
I think, and this will probably have to be, find someone to have a whole other episode on this, but I do think really sitting with the idea of like, how we have a food neutral home. And we're talking about bodies and body image a lot today, but I think how we talk about food and how we relate to food, and Lucy did touch on this, but food neutrality means that we are not applying moral judgment to food. There is not good food or bad food or cheat foods or sometimes foods, or like, food is food. All food serves our bodies. All food provides energy. I think we also be very cautious of like moral value on food when food insecurity is rampant in our province, in our communities, and kids are the greatest impacted by food insecurity. And so, frankly, if a child is able to get 3 meals a day and those 3 meals a day are boxed KD, don't feed my kid PDL. It's fantastic. I'm always grateful when there's leftovers. We just make 2 boxes, but a fed, like we take a fed as best approach to feeding children. I know we hear fed as best in the world of like breastfeeding and infant feeding, but like children need food first. Right? All food is going to nourish that child. All food contains energy. Kids need sugar. Kids need fat. So do adults for that matter. You don't have to offer all foods at all times, but how we talk about them is so important, right? Hey, can I have chocolate cake? We're not going to have chocolate cake right now. This is what's on the menu for tonight. But, another time chocolate cake would be great, right? No, you can't have chocolate cake. That's junk food. You need real food. Like, that's not going to nourish you. No, not what we're having right now. But yeah, I totally hear why you want a chocolate cake. That makes sense. I love it too, right? And just, when in doubt, say less. I think. But I would encourage parents listening or anyone listening, like, do a quick Google search, look into food neutrality. How do we shift the language we use around food? That is massively impactful on how children relate to themselves, their bodies, and how they nourish their bodies going forward. And again, a growing body shouldn't be restricting, period. Right? They need all nutrition, and they're going to be fine, right? Barring like diagnosed medical conditions. Your average child, they're going to be fine if they eat hot dogs for a week because they're camping. Like I've talked to people, nutritionists, about this, and they say it's actually a lot harder than parents think to not have your child have not enough nutrition. Like that there's lots of fortified vitamins and minerals and like processed food, and that it's kids are actually often getting more nutrition than we think they are. And I also wanted to do a little Canadian to American translation for our non-Canadian listeners. That KD that Alexis just mentioned is Kraft dinner, which is macaroni and cheese for all of our non-Canadians. Boxed macaroni and cheese, which we had a lot when my kids were growing up too. Well, Bitsy did. I will say one other thing. Again, think of summertime and you're outside, you're at the beach, you're having barbecue, and people get really panicked about that, the way they do it on like holiday eating. Lucy alluded to this. One of the things our dietitians often talk about is nutrition through addition. Like your kid wants chips. Great. That may not keep them full for very long. Adding some fat or protein would probably benefit them. So, okay, we're going to have chips. Let's also have, yogurt or something. I don't know. I'm not a dietitian. But like, what do we add? How do we add to the nutrition of something versus saying, have that, right? So just rounding out a meal, right? Balance. Great. We have part of our meal. Let's round it out. Let's add to it. So we're getting what we feel like eating, what's tasty and fun and delicious, and finding other delicious ways to make sure our bodies are getting all the nutrition that they need within someone's ability and access. Again, being very mindful that like food insecurity plays a big role. We can't ignore the sort of issue around affordability with food right now either.
Yeah, especially right now, 100%. Well, thank you both so much. I'm just going to close out by asking you the question that I ask all my podcast guests, which is, if you could go back in time, and it doesn't have it can have nothing to do with what we've been talking about. This is just your view as a parent. But if you could go back in time to your younger parent self, what advice would you give yourself? Be less anxious. Okay. With my newborn, I wish I had just not felt so tied to the house. I think when you have one, obviously that changes when you have multiple kids, but like, I wish I hadn't had to rush home to feed him, or like I could have actually just stayed out, and
and just be less anxious, go with the flow a little bit more. It'll be okay. I probably could have used that.
Nice.
Yeah, I think for myself, it would be feel less guilty. I think there's a lot of guilt to parenting and especially working full time. I think there's a lot of expectations, and I feel like lately I've just been letting it go, and I don't want to feel the guilt. And I feel like I'm role modeling something great for my kids, that you can work full time, you can be successful, and you can be present with them as well. And so feeling less guilty of sharing your time and then being present when you can in whatever capacity. I think that's for me what I've been working on.
Love that. Thank you both so much for your time today. A really valuable conversation. Where, if folks want to find out more about you and what you do, where's the best place to go?
I would suggest our best place is BANA.ca. So www.bana.ca. That's our website. And they can find lots of information about everything from eating disorders to health promotion to prevention to how to seek help and resources.
Oh, perfect. Okay, we'll put that in the show notes. Thank you. Thank you again. It was a really helpful conversation.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. I hope you found this conversation insightful and exactly what you needed in this moment. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Remember that I'm rooting for you. I see you out there showing up for your kids and doing the best you can. Sending hugs over the airwaves today. Hang in there. You've got this.